We're going to be talking about how you can utilize your mind-body link for health and well-being, how you can start to take charge, to have a surprising influence on health and well-being by changing really some simple things like what you focus on, and also by calming your stress response. I'm going to be giving you some simple practical strategies and some simple techniques so that you can start to send the right messages to your brain right away. I'm also going to be looking at some other things. So by the end of the session, you should know a little bit about how the mind-body link works and the importance of the stress response, and also some simple techniques to start to change things straight away. Before we do any of that, a little bit about me. My name is Jenny Gilmore. I'm an NLP health coach, and I've been working here at York Natural Health for many years. As a practitioner, I work with clients. I focus on working with clients who find themselves surprisingly stuck. Maybe they've had good health in the past, and then all of a sudden they haven't. And they then expect to heal, and then they don't. As a practitioner, I help clients to work through and understand how and why they've got stuck, and help clients to resolve that using tools from neuro-linguistic programming, which is a powerful set of techniques for creating change, from coaching, and also, if you wish, from things like hypnotherapy. I am also personally recovered from 14 years of moderate to severe chronic fatigue, which meant I was only able to leave the house for a couple of weeks, or a couple of times a week for many years. I also successfully managed a back injury, which I sustained when I was 19 years old, when I picked up a backpack and twisted. As a practitioner, I work with clients at York Natural Health one-to-one, perhaps over 2 or 3 or 4 sessions. Or if clients are running particular issues, things like chronic fatigue, chronic pain, I specialize in a technique which runs over 3 days and includes a year's support package known as the lightning process. That was designed more than 20 years ago by an osteopath, Phil Parker. And it's part of the learnings from his own journey. As a young man, he severed a very important nerve in his hand, and he was partway through his training to be an osteopath. And he also wanted to be a rock guitarist. You kind of need both of your hands for both of those things. And he did find strategies. He did find ways through. He was told by several people that his hand wasn't going to be functional, but he kept going until he found someone who told him he was going to be able to change it. And that's what he did. So we're going to be focusing on the techniques that he uses and that I use as a practitioner that have helped many people over the years. I have clients who are severely fatigued change their health so that they can run marathons. I've had clients with diagnoses like chronic regional pain syndrome, after the training, just take themselves off and go for a 3-mile walk. I've had people with long COVID resume their lives. And how have they done that? They have utilized their own mind-body link to create change. They've learned to rewire their neurology so that they've been breaking out of those cycles that have kept them stuck, and moved out of those and moved into wellness instead. So today I'm going to be focusing on psychoimmunology, the scientific word for the mind-body link, how we use language, and the importance of the stress response. And I'm going to start with a brief overview of the power of the mind-body link. And I'm going to start with the work of researchers people like Benedetti, Kapacek, and Kirsch, who've researched over the years into the power of the mind-body link. But actually, the mind-body link is one of the most researched things that there is. The reason is that our mind-body is so powerful that every single new drug is tested against a placebo, a drug with no active ingredient. If it's a tablet, it's a sugar pill. If it's an injection, it's something like saline. And research is done like that, so that people can distinguish between the power of the mind-body link and the medication itself. The effect, the placebo effect, is up to 40%. And I'm going to give you some examples now. And there are lots of those out there. And I'm going to look at ones which are particularly I find really, really interesting. And one of those was where they took a group of Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's patients lack a chemical in the body called dopamine, which means that they have issues like a tremor and rigidity and other symptoms and issues as well. And you can reduce the effect of Parkinson's by injecting a medication on a daily basis called apomorphine. And what the researchers did was over 3 days, they injected this medication. Every day, the clients got an improvement in symptoms. And on the 4th day, they injected a placebo, saline. And most of the patients, not all of them, but most of the patients saw improvements. Were they just thinking themselves better? They could have been. But actually, when researchers looked at markers in the body, things like scans, it was quite clear that the body was producing dopamine. A second example, there's a researcher, Benedetti, and he works up in the Alps. And up in the Alps, up there isn't very much oxygen. And he works with athletes and he puts oxygen masks on them and he gives them extra oxygen, and their performance up there in the Alps improves. But there's an interesting thing. If he gives the athletes a face mask with a tube attached and tells them that it's attached to oxygen, their performance also improves, as if they had oxygen, as if they were working at ground level. And there's another interesting thing about this placebo response as well, this mind-body link, illustrated by an experiment where they gave people an immunosuppressant drug. And this drug did things like affect people's levels of T cells and histamine. And over 3 days, they gave individuals this drug and they paired it with a drink. On the 4th day, they only gave the drink. And people got the same changes in the immune system as if they had been given the medication. There is like a conditioned response effect happening there. And interestingly, our language is important too. And we're going to talk more about that in more detail, because it's one of the key ways that we can start to change things straight away when we're feeling stuck. The words we say to ourselves have an effect. So, researchers took brain scans of people and they were scanning their brains live in the moment. And they took brain scans of people and their responses to words. Some words were kind of random words, like things off a grocery list. But other words were words like pain, which had a particular potency for those individuals and caused the brain to light up in quite a different way. Researchers have also found that if somebody has an injury, a fracture of some kind, the worst thing you can say to them is that it's fractured or that there's a green stick injury and it's serious. If you say it's just a crack in the bone, then it's less likely to have an impact. And the language we say to ourselves is important too. So I I broke my foot and had an issue with the injury. And the issue with the injury was when I saw it on the x-ray, I labeled it as sharp. And the nurse picked this up. And because I was running a lot of stress response in that moment because of what the injury looked like. And my own use of the word sharp. Her languaging was different than that, was much more supportive of healing. So, how do we do this? How do we start to create changes? Why do some people respond to placebo? If you mathematically model it using computers, the brain seems to put its resources where it thinks is worthwhile. And I'm just going to share another slide here. Okay. So, how does this happen? How do some people recover when other people don't? If you mathematically model people using computers, it's like the brain invests resources where it thinks it's worthwhile. But there's also something really interesting and important happening. And it's this. The clue is neuroplasticity. Years ago, they used to think that the brain was fairly fixed and it didn't change very much when we were adults. But when they started to use MRI scans, they realized that the brain changed a lot over time. An example would be that taxi drivers who learn the knowledge, all the streets of London, so that they could become a taxi driver, the parts of their brain involved in sense of direction increased in size. Our brain operates a little bit like a muscle. It responds to use. And the more we do something, the better our brain gets at it. So we run a particular pathway, and that pathway in the brain starts to run quickly and easily. And what we start to do, and one of the things that we train people to do in the lightning process, is to start to use pathways they haven't been using that often, so that those pathways run quickly and easily. And they become the default. It's a little bit like predictive text on a telephone or on a mobile phone. I have some predictive text and it's my email address, and it just sits there at the top when I'm writing things which start with the first few letters of my name. But there's an issue here. And this is a bit like what our brain does sometimes. The issue is that there's an error in my email in that particular time, but my phone doesn't know that. And the brain is the same. Neuroplasticity is just neuroplasticity. The brain is just responding to use. So we can unintentionally start to tip things towards ill health just by how we're using our brain. One of the key things is language. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And what we need to start to be doing is absolutely opposite, to start to tip our systems towards healing. And that is what I train people to do. So that we can start to tip our system in our favor. And here is one simple way you can start to do it right now. I'm going to, at the end of the session or towards the end of the session, put together, bring out a simple tool that you can start to do this, where you can start to spot, just choose a few things to start off with, where you are unintentionally tipping things in a non-useful direction, and start to change things so that you are tipping things in a way that supports healing, so that we are starting to create the neurology and actually also the physiology in our body that supports us in healing. And here is one simple way you can do this. Here we've got a picture of a goat. I'm actually asking you, or I'm going to talk a little bit about Albert Einstein, who very famously came up with the theory of relativity. But I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think about his hair. The fact that he's got kind of wiry white hair, which is a little bit reminiscent of that white patch on the fur on that goat. But I don't want you to think about that at all. I absolutely want you on no account to think about goats. What do you think about goats? Brains do not process negatives. It's a little bit like if you were to say to your dog, I'm not taking you for a walk today. All the dog hears is the word walk. Brains, our brains, their brains, our brains, do not process negatives. And this is one of the ways that we can accidentally move towards stark. And this is how. And say, for example, we're affected by a painful condition. We might start thinking things like, I don't want to feel this pain anymore. I wish this pain would go away. I need to fix this pain. How am I going to fix this pain? Accidentally, we are focusing on that. When we use that word, our brain is using all those representations of that word. We are rewiring our brain unintentionally to go that way more. And actually, people around us can start to do that as well. I had a client and his mum got him to rate his pain on a scale of 1 to 10 before they did anything. Every time she was building unintentionally the physiology, the neurology, the pain. It's a word you might start to take out of your language, but here is a pain rating scale. It uses that word, that word, that word, that word. And here's another one. This one is for fatigue. It uses the word fatigue, drowsiness, lacking energy, many, many times. It's the kind of languaging that Derren Brown would use if he wanted someone to feel tired. A hypnotherapist. We accidentally use language that doesn't support us, and people along the way unintentionally don't help us either. Fatigue, problems, tired, being tired, usual. Problems. And here's another one in IBD. So we can accidentally start to focus on and build the neurology of the things that we are not wanting. And then it comes about changing that. As I said, some people take the P word out of their languaging completely. One client of mine uses the word X. Another client just talks about discomfort. And the word comfort is moving us towards where we want to go. We are bioplastic. Our systems respond to changes. Pain, it's always felt in the brain. It's not felt by a little receptor anywhere. It's an interpretation by the brain of the symptoms that we're feeling. There are changes that it makes in the body, and it can create a loop which unintentionally perpetuates symptoms. And what I'm going to talk about now is another key issue here, and that is the stress response. So we have this loop and we find we're not recovering, and it starts to have an impact on our lives. We maybe are having to work part-time, or we're not working at all. And maybe we're off the sick, and then we're not sure what's going to happen after 3 months or 6 months. Or the symptoms themselves are creating stress for us, or the impact it's having on our family is creating stress for us. We are really, really quickly in a loop, which is the issues themselves, but also our responses to them. And the stress response is a really, really amazing human protective response. In the lightning process, we call it the physiological response, emergency response, because it's what the brain does when it thinks there is an emergency. So, for example, there, you in your room, just outside the door, there is a tiger, and you hear it growl. It nudges the door open and comes in. It's a hungry tiger. What would you do? Your body would probably go into the stress response in order to fight a tiger. The things that we need when there is a tiger in the room is our limb muscles. We either run away or we fight it. And the body creates all kinds of changes in order to enable that to happen. And one of those changes is changes in the immune system, which doesn't work as effectively. Another changes is changes in the way that we digest food. So sometimes if people have been running chronic ill health, one of the complications they start to get is that they are less good at digesting food. They may be producing less digestive enzymes, or their whole system is just not working as well as it normally does, because that isn't where the body's priority is. The body's priority is fighting tigers. But that response is designed to work for about 30 seconds, a few minutes. And unfortunately, part of our loop sometimes is activating that system over and over and over again, which in itself starts to create symptoms. And also, we can end up with all kinds of unusual and strange rewiring issues going on. The fight and flight actually does that as well. It can start to change the way our nerves work, so that sometimes a perfectly comfortable muscle will be sending a message to the brain that it's painful. Or the brain is receiving such confusing messages that it's doing the best it can with them, and it's maybe slowing us down and creating extra fatigue. In phantom limb pain, in one study where a limb was removed, which was causing pain, only 2 of 28 experienced pain relief, and only a tiny proportion could wear a prosthesis. What can we do about this kind of thing? Where can we change things? I'm going to show you now a really simple technique where we can start to change things a step at a time. Now, I'm going to go to my whiteboard, and I'm hoping on there will be a simple sheet. If anybody's got a piece of paper, that would be absolutely great. A pen, even better. And some of you might even have some of these. They are post-it stickers. And what we're going to do now is spend a little bit of time in this session thinking about the simple changes that you can start to change right now, or start to make right now. Perhaps in the way that you use language, perhaps in terms of things that you do and places you go. Things that move you away from the things that are building the neurology of what you don't want, and towards building the neurology of what you do want. For all of this, this is individual. If I am working to increase my level of comfort, one of the things that I will do is walk more in nature. I find I relax when I'm doing that. One of the things I won't do is sit. Choose a specific issue. So I'm just going to share this now. This is a simple chart, and I have one of them here. The simple chart, it's a piece of paper, and it's got written on it things that you say and think, things that you do, places you go, and people you spend time with. And on one side, this is the negatives. Okay. And what you can do is take a piece of paper, put it landscape, put a line down the middle, and just think about the things that you say and you do which aren't helping you. So going back to James's brilliant example of working at a workstation, if I have been sitting at my computer for ages, the temptation is not to empower myself by moving 20 paces, as James was suggesting earlier. My temptation is to say to myself, my back hurts because I'm getting old. I'm not even old. Yeah. My back hurts because I am getting old. It's a thing that I say to myself. And when I say that to myself, do I tip my neurology towards recovery and a great back? No, I tip it away from it. I'm kind of saying to myself, there is nothing I can do, because how much control do we have? How many choices do we have about the fact that we're getting older? Not many. And I think about the things that I might do that don't support me if I'm starting to get uncomfortable sitting at a station, at a back station. Do I get up and move around? No. Shoulders come up and I start to work like this. Notice from a physiological response here, Alison would probably, and she's talking about breathing later, I think I'm probably moving my breathing up here at the same time. I'm certainly putting my body into a pattern which is characteristic of the stress response. We are a mind to body system, but we are also a body to mind system. I am feeding at this time lots of stress response messages back to my brain. And when I think about my back, and when I've got a list here, and it's places that I go, sometimes when I'm working, because it's nice and comfortable, relaxing, I'm sitting on the sofa like that, like that. And at the end of the day, I do notice that I'm like that, especially if I've sat there for 2 hours as opposed to 20 minutes. People I spend time with. Working at the computer, I tend to work alone, but I am tempted sometimes just to go and sit down in a coffee shop where there's a lot of noise. Really? Again, it has a physiological impact on the body. So, what's useful here? I started to make a list of some of the wonderful things that James suggested as a change to improving things when we're working at working stations. Here's one, and I've put it on a yellow post-it. It's probably written backwards. It says, raise the height of the laptop when working with training. As I'm sitting here talking to you, my seat is too high, too hard, and my computer is too low. I'm not surprised. Sometimes I sit in this position and train clients for 4 hours. We're taking a break every hour, but that's not enough. And another thing is to move the screen on my main computer, which isn't central, it's tucked over to one side so that it's really nice and aesthetic with some plants on the other side of the table. No, is that useful? A thing that I can do is move that computer so that it's lovely and central. Things that I say and think. Actually, James has given us a great toolkit. It's quite clearly possible to increase comfort when we're working at workstations because he's telling us how to do it. And people where I spend time with, I think, quietly sat in the office. So just sitting there, and you might have noticed when James was working, I was just scribbling. I was busy there creating a simple sheet of things that didn't support me in working well at a computer and things that do. And this technique is adapted for increasing levels of comfort for people with chronic back issues like myself. And also you can start to apply it to other chronic conditions, things like long COVID, things like chronic fatigue, things like chronic regional pain. Now, if somebody was coming to me, say with long COVID, I would perhaps work with them initially with this kind of thing, perhaps in the first few months, the body's healing. But often if they were remaining stuck, if they weren't healing, I would go in there with the lightning process. It is, I've given you a taster of one or a few of the little tools in there, but there's masses to it, and it works because it's all done at the same time. Okay. Other clients, I'm working with them in order just to put together their own version of this. Just imagine if I'm going to give you an example from my back of where I would work with a client. I've actually worked with myself to clear this one. Now, I run a pattern. It's a belief. It's a belief, and it's not useful. And the belief is I should do things myself. I should do things myself and not ask for help. Great. Sometimes I'm really independent. I'm very focused. I get things done. I have put my back out twice, lifting a chest of drawers up a flight of stairs. That is over here. It's driven by the belief not to ask for help. And so I then worked and I cleared that belief, and it's modified. It was a very strongly held belief. I learned it from my mum. And we don't ask for help in our family. And so I've worked with that belief and I've shifted it and I've tweaked it. And it's now much less potent. It's a relaxed belief, and it's got the word sometimes attached to it. Sometimes I do things myself and I don't ask for help. Other times, like when it comes to lifting a chest of drawers, up a flight of stairs, I do. And do people mind? No. What I've discovered by asking people for help with things like that is often people are happy to help. And that's another really, really interesting example of something that is tipping us towards creating neurology that isn't supporting us in wellness. And what I've done is I've changed what I do, changed how I think to tip up, to start supporting myself in recovery. Okay, so I think I've covered the materials I was going to talk about today. We've whizzed through psychoimmunology, a really great, massive, and absolutely fascinating field. A quick example. There was a guy, and this is an old, well-established story, he walks into a clinic and he sniffs a plastic rose and he has an allergic reaction because he's allergic to roses and he doesn't realize it's plastic. It's a paired response. It's a conditioned response in the body. I have a client. She's so sensitive to smell that when I walk into her apartment building, her husband has been taking off the flowers in the communal hallway. I did the lightning process with her over 3 days, and at the end of day 3, we were sat in the garden. She thought the smell of the flowers was making her ill. It wasn't. She was smelling the flowers, running a really particularly tricky version of the stress response, and that was making her ill. We broke that relationship with the LP, and she was then able to go outside. An example of the kind of amazing and positive change that it's possible to make with clients. Okay, a little bit about me before we finish. As I say, I tend to work with people in health coaching, helping them to put their plan together. Sometimes we work on specific stucks, things like beliefs and all of that, and I have a huge NLP toolkit to do that. And I also work with the lightning process. If you want any information about what I do, I am on the website. I can also go into a breakout room after the end of the session. There's also just an opportunity now, just a quick opportunity, just to answer any questions that have arisen. But before we do that, I do have free discovery calls on my website. So if you link to me, you can find me very easily, Jenny Gilmore, York. You can also talk to me and we can have a free discovery phone call. Okay, thank you very much. Alison.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That was really interesting and very informative. I found that really fascinating to hear all about the placebo and how we can use our language more effectively. And of course, when people come in for osteopathy, they say, oh, I've got this pain here, and you're asking them about the pain straight away. Is there a way that we could change that language so we have a different focus? What would you say instead?
Yes. The languaging, it may in itself be okay, though it usually isn't. You might notice language just by observing the client if it has a particular potency. They're kind of like this. But I tend to take the P out completely if I'm working with clients with chronic issues. And I use discomfort. Discomfort is already starting to tip the client towards comfortable, because of course, like don't think about goats, the brain is starting to access messages about comfort.
That sounds really good. So what would you use a different word instead of the P word?
Yeah, discomfort.
Just discomfort.
Just discomfort.
So
sometimes people will use something like the word X, something which is completely neutral and nothing attached to it at all.
Oh, that's really interesting. So would you say something like sensation as well? Rather, would that take away some of the potency of the pain? So we talk about it as discomfort, and that's not going to light up the part of the brain that's dealing with the discomfort. Then is that still a better option? Then?
Yeah, because the brain will be accessing its representations of the word comfort.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And sometimes as well, the power of the osteopath, the power of the healer is really potent. How you present and how you use the language is useful. You might place and lead, so you might use the word pain twice. So you're working with the client where they are, walking with them, and then lead them out into something like discomfort.
Brilliant. That sounds really great. You mentioned your website. You've also got the website Generating Change, which I'm just going to add into the chat box as well. And we've got a question coming through. Let's see. The question, what would you like to achieve? Is that helpful?
Yes, the question, what you would like to achieve, is really, really good. Sometimes there's an issue with that question. It's that it could be over there, or notice where that question is. What kind of achieve? What would you like to achieve right now might be useful. Notice that these changes that we were talking about, the changes that James was talking about, there are a mixture. So for example, I have written on my list to go out and buy one of those things that you can attach to the side of the screen, but I can get up and move around. I can for every 20 minutes straight away. So what would you like to achieve is an absolutely wonderful question. Make sure though, if you hear, I don't want to feel anxious as a response, that you switch it round. When you're not feeling anxious, what does that give you that's positive? Because otherwise we're doing the goat thing. Yeah, don't think about goats. Our brain is accessing the words anxious.
Really helpful. It's very insightful, and especially the placebo. And we, if we can harness the power of our language to transform our physiology, I think NLP is based on the idea that there are certain language patterns that successful people use. Yes. And so you're training people to use more successful language to make their lives more successful, more healthy, wholesome, and optimize them, so that you're working with the mind-body link, as you said.
Yes, so that we can be our best version of ourselves. It doesn't matter, I still have a real physical injury in my back, and but I can be a great version of myself operating in the world with that. It involves keeping the muscle system strong. It involves not lifting heavy things up flights of stairs. All of those are in there, but when I do that, I'm living a great version of myself, and that is really, in essence, what NLP is all about: modeling of things that work well.
I love that, being a great version of yourself. And it sounds like you don't even have to be perfect. It really feels like you can give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling and still have a great life and optimize what you've got.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny. That's been really wonderful.